So, Ashley, welcome to the show. Kind of again, you and I had spoken on my other podcast a while back, and we share a similar livelihood, a similar passion. So, I thought it would be cool to have you on Spaniard School, the student podcast, and kind of talk to the kids, to the students that you might not reach in the schools that you visit. So, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here, and I'm glad to be here with all of your listeners right at this very moment.
Yeah. So I know you and I have talked over the last several years because we share a similar passion and livelihood. Share with the listeners kind of who you are, your story, and what led you to becoming a youth speaker and sharing the message that you do.
Yeah, so I live in Newport, Rhode Island. I'm from New England, from Massachusetts originally, and I am a full-time youth speaker. So I spend pretty much every day, every week, managing my schedule, traveling all over the country, mostly going into high schools, but also some middle schools and some colleges as well. And I really got into this because I had a really hard life as a teen. I went through a lot of challenges, a lot of struggles, and I think the biggest mistake that I made was really feeling alone, not asking for help, not knowing that there was help available. So, in a weird full circle way, now I get to be kind of the speaker, the guide, and the mentor that I needed as a kid. And so I go into schools, I share a bit of my story, and I try to bring some really important life lessons, the things that I think all young people need to know to be successful, not just today in their lives, but throughout their whole lives.
Yeah, I think of it like that too. It's kind of preparation for life. I have two small kids, and I think I raise my own two kids, but in a way, you and I get to have an impact on thousands and thousands of kids, which is a pretty cool thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I often joke that like I don't know if I want kids or not. I'm like, because now I can just be like a mother to all the children.
And
I want to
and
help as many kids as I can.
Yeah, the way I kind of think about that when people ask what I do, and then they say, "Oh, that must be fulfilling." I say I'm like the cool uncle or the grandpa. I'm in and out, and the kids love you, and then you leave, and so it's like I have your cake and eat it too type of job. That's how I think of it.
Absolutely.
So, what is your story and an overall kind of theme of your messaging?
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest part of my story centers on the relationships I had as a teenager. Most of my talks are about healthy relationships, specifically healthy dating relationships, because sadly for me, I was a 14-year-old. I was excited, I was naive, I was new to the world of just kind of high school and like semi-adult life. And I had met my first boyfriend, and unfortunately, he became very abusive. Not always physically, but he was very emotionally and verbally abusive. And it really just impacted my mental health, my self esteem, kind of led me down this path of not knowing how to always deal with those negative, feelings. And as a result, turning to a lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms to try to get rid of those feelings. And then there were a lot of other issues too. He was spreading a lot of rumors at school, so I was bullied a lot. And I just kind of kept a lot of secrets to myself. I struggled to like myself, I struggled to have any self worth. I was hiding this abusive relationship. And unfortunately, that is really just kind of the beginning. That was my first relationship. And so I didn't know what was healthy, what wasn't. And it was the first of many unhealthy relationships that, to make a long story short, really kind of turned my life upside down. I went from being a happy, outgoing, bubbly, like school loving kid to feeling like I was just quiet. I didn't want to talk to people. My grades weren't doing well. I couldn't focus on school. And by the time I was 20, my life had just kind of been taken over to the point where I even dropped out of college. And thankfully, I was able to, at some point in that story, turn my life around and really learn what was healthy, work on my own healing, rebuild my confidence and self worth. And my life has been a gift ever since that I never expected. But most of my adolescence really centered on a lot of just personal struggles and peer struggles. And it's why I now speak on these issues today.
Yeah, so I want to kind of backtrack a little bit, but before we do that, I want to spell out a lesson for any young person listening now. Is that you said your life has turned into something you never could have imagined, and you very much enjoy what you're doing. There's a lot of sunshine in your life now. And so many times, not always, but so many times that sunshine comes after struggles and after adversity and after hard times. And I think that's really important for kids to hear and to actually believe is that, hey, I'm in this valley right now, but there is sunshine on the other side, that in after the dark comes the sunlight. And I think your story proves that to a T.
Yeah, I mean, I often say to students in my talks that if I was in their seat and some speaker came in and said, "You can have an amazing life," I would have thought, "Yeah, but not me."
Mhm.
Right? Because I really did feel like I was destined to fail or destined to struggle. Every time there was another unhealthy relationship or another abusive partner, I thought maybe this is just my fate. I think I never realized that I could do something to change this. I just thought I had to deal with the things that came at me. And what I've certainly learned is that you can't always change what happened, but you can change your relationship with them. You can grow from them. You can ask for help. And in a crazy way, the areas of my life that were, my weakest and my most painful now are the source of my greatest strength and my skills and how I can serve others. So, yeah, sometimes, the sunshine comes after the rain, like you said, we find these silver linings from the challenges that we faced.
Yeah, and the relevance, especially talking to students, middle school or high school, especially, but like what you just said, if someone came to your auditorium and said, you can have a wonderful life, yeah, right, that's not for me. Your credibility, your story, it has to be so like the glue that holds it together, because they have to believe in you and your message. You're not just singing joy and praise and clapping, you're showing a very like difficult, traumatic story and stories that they think, oh, huh, she did get, maybe I could, right? And that hope is one of the greatest gifts I think people like you give to kids.
Yeah. I think the other piece too is when you're young and you're struggling, often you feel like this is just something unique to you. No one could possibly understand. And I think even just hearing someone else's story and realizing how similar it is to yours, sometimes it's the first time in your life that you don't feel so alone. And sometimes that's kind of the first step that you need to realizing, okay, there's people out there that get me, can understand it, and maybe can even help me. So yeah, that solidarity is really important.
Absolutely. I have another friend who also speaks to students. His name's Matt Bocci, and his father actually died in 9/11 in one of the towers, and he went through a life of sexual abuse, drug addiction. Like his book, it's called Sway, unbelievable book, and he also does what we do. And again, that's a source of credibility. Like, what do you know, buddy? Well, this is what I know. And that credibility, I think, is one of the just such a vital part of providing a good relatable message to kids.
Absolutely.
So you had talked about abuse, and when someone if someone says the word abuse, my guess would be most people think physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, maybe in that order. I automatically think physical just because that's what, I don't know, first thing that pops into my head. Explain emotional abuse, because you mentioned that was your first relationship, your first exposure to, this might not be right. Is it right? Is it normal? I don't get it. Explain like detail what emotional abuse is, either was for you or could look like for a kid.
Yeah, I think that's such a good question because it's a really common misconception. We hear abuse and we think physical harm, but someone who's abusive is really controlling. And they can control you with their fists, but they can also control you with their words and their expectations and how they treat you. And so for me, and for most teens, emotional abuse is actually the most common type of abuse. So this would be a partner who might be jealous, insecure, a little bit possessive. And this can look like them kind of dictating who your friends are, them influencing, who you spend your time with, who you can be friends with. They might want to share locations with you. They might expect access to your social media passwords. They might question why you liked a certain photo on someone else's page. They're just very, very controlling. And it starts really small, where like you're not maybe allowed to see your friends. They get upset if you do things without them. And slowly but subtly, you start to realize that kind of your whole life revolves around making sure that they don't get upset at you. And, that can take many different forms. But I think the things like, social media and just kind of checking in, wanting to know where you are at all times, what you're doing, that's really common. And, at the heart of a healthy relationship, you can have some independence. There's trust. Someone doesn't try to control every aspect of your life. So those are the things that I was experiencing, as well as like emotional abuse, someone making little jokes about your looks, about what you're wearing today. And, if I got upset, I was told I had to lighten up. I couldn't take a joke. But all these little things start to really impact your mental health and how you view yourself. So it's really important that we realize that, words, actions, and behaviors can be controlling and harmful, if not as much, maybe more than someone who's physically abusive. And then I do think it's also important to mention that, if you are in a relationship like this, someone can get physically abusive over time, but we don't always think it's physical abuse. So if you're with somebody who gets angry and they slam doors, punch walls, drive a little bit erratically, those are these little warning signs that they might have some physical aggression, and that they could become abusive over time. So I think anyone listening, if you know someone like this, if someone like this is in your life, pay close attention to those little feelings that you have that maybe this isn't healthy. And, this can be a dating partner, but it can also be a friend too. We can have people in our lives that are really controlling and impact our mental health. And it's so important that we realize this, because we have to take care of ourselves first. And the people we spend our time with are really going to impact, how we live and how we succeed.
Yeah, one of the things you said really stuck with me. It hit me. I never had to deal with it because when I was growing up, we didn't have social media, so I didn't have to, there were no likes or whatever. But the very specific example you said of someone getting upset at you liking another person's post, that never crossed my mind as a human. I never considered a kid being questioned. And I can imagine it because I'm sure there was a version of that when I was a kid, just different, it wasn't a click on a social media, but that's a really great example of a potential warning sign. And I have a question that's a difficult question, and I hope you've been asked before, so I don't put you on the spot. But like, I talk about bullying a fair amount, right? Fighting as a professional fighter, I'm not a bully, and I draw the line, the distinctions between bullying and professional fighting, et cetera. And so I talk a lot about bullying, and there's a fine line between kids being kids and bullying, right? So an argument with your boyfriend or girlfriend or your friend versus, hey, this might be abuse. This might be emotional abuse. Are there any kind of guidelines or from your personal experience that you might recommend to a kid to understand when, hey, this is more than just an argument with my boyfriend or girlfriend or friend?
Yeah, I think in any relationship, there's, healthy arguing where you're not going to always agree on things. You're going to have disagreements, you're going to have conflict. But hopefully those resolve in a healthy way. You talk about it, you work through things together. I think that, I think these behaviors cross a line when one person's being hurt. And I think when we are hurt, sometimes we don't speak up for ourselves, but I think we need to tell the person who's maybe making these comments or making jokes about us, like, hey, I really don't appreciate when you make jokes about my hair all the time, or I really don't like how you're constantly like picking on my clothes. And if they continue to do that, that's where it crosses a line. Because I think most people don't mean to be cruel or hurt your feelings, especially if you laugh in the moment, they might not think it's a big deal. So I think it's important that we, again, like express our needs, say, it bothers me when you say this, when you do this. And if they keep doing it, that's when that line really gets crossed. Um, yeah, typically it's like one person is the instigator. It's that one friend who's always kind of, making the jokes, making you feel bad. And when there's that imbalance, that's kind of when the bully victim mentality comes in. It's like one person's always doing the harm, the other person's hurt. Maybe you've tried to talk about it and they haven't listened or changed their behaviors.
Yeah, again, that's great information. And I think it's hard to say this, you know this and I know this, but for a kid, it might, they might need to hear it maybe for the first time, that sometimes ending relationships, although in the short term it's really, 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 really difficult, it's a net benefit, meaning that after a day, a week, a month, a year, your life will be better. There are people in your life who bring you down or add abuse or negativity, that it's so hard to like change groups of friends, change boyfriends or girlfriends or this. It's very difficult. And it only gets more difficult with age, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to believe, person listening, you have to believe that oftentimes that's a necessary step for a life improvement.
Absolutely.
Um, so you travel around to different schools, you interact with students, and I know some of the personal interactions that I've had or the feedback that I get, and a lot of it brings me to tears, thinking that, man, these kids, I describe it as we are like a release valve that enables a kid just to release a lot of this stuff. And it could be about a variety of different things. So first question is, how did you get to the point that you actually sought help, that you actually opened up, that you actually talked to someone? And then the second part of that is, what is some of the feedback that you get from students?
Mm. So I would say, kind of just going back to the story I mentioned in the beginning, I kind of dealt with everything on my own from like 14 to 20. So I never really sought help. The only way I kind of broke that whole cycle is because unfortunately I was attacked by my college boyfriend. I had to go to the courts. He was arrested, and it was a crazy time when you're only 20. I'd never experienced that before. And I kind of was just left alone in the world. And while I never went and asked for help anywhere, I chose to like crazy self-educate. So I started reading up on abuse. I was reading personal development books, self-help books. And what really helped me is I started volunteering at a domestic violence agency. So I was getting really involved in the cause. I was learning more. I was feeling less like it was my fault. I understood what abuse was, and I was being surrounded by a lot of mentors and role models. So I didn't seek like a specialist, but I found really positive adults to be around as I was healing. And that really just um, kind of sparked this whole after story. Volunteering, having role models, volunteering with another organization, meeting women that could be inspirational and kind of mentor me in life. So whether you talk to a therapist, a counselor at school, or even just find like one trusted adult, find a mentor, find a role model, because that was transformational for me. And I think if you're struggling, I caution everybody to go to Google, because you're not always going to find the best advice, but just kind of find those credible resources, the national, dating violence hotline, or a governmental site on youth mental health, and start to read, because I think you'll start to realize that there's things to explain what you're feeling and there's things you can do. So that's kind of what I did. And then as far as like my interactions with students after, it varies. I have a lot of students that will come up and say, this wasn't me, but this was my sibling, this was my parent, this was my friend. And they're always just really grateful to kind of have these conversations, because often you feel very alone. And then every time I speak, I have students that do disclose and say, I'm in an abusive relationship right now, or I was in one and I never realized that like other people went through this before. And it's powerful. Some of those people have actually gone on and reported their abusers. I had a student once who had been unfortunately sexually assaulted by an older male. And after hearing me speak, she reported him. He was prosecuted. She
Wow.
was getting therapy. And it was just really powerful. And sometimes I even have kids come up and say they think they might be a little bit abusive. And I have resources for them too. I think all of us are trying to learn how to be humans, how to be adults, how to be in healthy relationships on both sides of the coin. And, I think that's really powerful. So I think that's what we do is we create these spaces where people feel safe to open up
Yeah.
when they normally don't.
It's really awesome. And that's got to feel so good to make that impact, right? To actually make change in a kid's life. So
Yeah.
cool.
And we
Uh,
both know, we don't even know the extent of the impact we make because I'm sure a lot of the listeners here are like, I heard an assembly speaker and it was powerful, but I didn't go hug them. I didn't, email them to thank them, but they remembered what we said. So, they're listening.
I can't tell you, and listeners, when you're grown up, maybe you'll be the one to say this, but I can't tell you, Ashley, how many people like grown-ups, when they find out what I do, will be like, I remember when I was in 7th grade, we had a speaker, and literally brings me to tears because I think that's the guy that I want to be. I want to be that guy for kids,
Yeah.
right, across the country. And it's just such a neat thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the last question I have for you is, so we talk about relationships, healthy relationships, and it doesn't have to be boyfriend or girlfriend. It can be parents, it can be cousins, it can be friends, it can be coaches, it can be whatever. Is it hard for you? So take a kid, perhaps then you get burned by a relationship, right? You're soured on relationships that could make you fearful to trust or to love or to interact or get close to anyone. Was it hard for you? Is it hard for you? Was it hard for you? What do you say to a kid who thinks like, my mom and dad don't love me, I'm not going to trust in anyone, right? Or my best friend turned their back on me, I'm done. Like, can you just talk a little bit through that process from maybe your experiences and or what you might offer to a kid about that?
Mm. Yeah, this is a great question because it's really common. I think when you've been hurt, it does hurt your sense of trust. It hurts your sense of trust in other people, and it also hurts your sense of trust like in yourself. Like, am I a good judge of character? How do I even trust myself to like meet the right person? And it can be scary. We can put walls up. And for me personally, I was angry for a while. I just wanted to be on my own, be independent, didn't want to date anyone. And when I did try dating, I had like a short fuse. I wasn't a very patient partner. I just kind of wanted to run before letting myself be vulnerable. And so it took some time. But I think for me, like I said, I kind of put a lot of effort into my own self healing. The reading, I was journaling, I was meditating. I was trying all these different things. And I finally got to a point where I felt like I had worked on me enough to be a really healthy and loving partner. And then I put myself back out there. And I tried to remind myself that my experience, the people that I have known, are not representative of all people. That one bad relationship doesn't mean that all people are going to be bad. That one person who cheated doesn't mean that all people are cheaters. And you just have to trust in that. And, this is what relationships are, it's trial and error. I dated people who seemed great, and then all of a sudden there were red flags, and oh, I guess too bad, I got to end the relationship.
Yep.
But this is what you learn. You learn to be an advocate for yourself. You learn what's healthy for you, and you will eventually find a healthy partner when the time is right in your life. There are endless people out there that are loving, respectful, trustworthy, and just amazing people to be with. And you just have to know that that's true and just keep trying.
Well, I appreciate the talk, you being here. And the more we talk and the more I listen to what you're saying, it just reinforces the importance of what you're talking about, healthy relationships. I knew what you talked about. You and I have talked behind the scenes off and on throughout the years, but as you talked, I thought, holy cow, this is like as relevant as anything. And it's a really awesome thing that you do.
Thank you.
Um,
I appreciate it.
as kind of a close here, what would you like to offer? Is there any website, both for schools who might want to bring you in to speak, but also for students? You had mentioned, and I didn't say this, I wanted to, you had mentioned students finding a role model. Ashley is a role model. So student, you're sitting there listening, thinking, oh yeah, I understand that, I connect with that. Yeah, that's me. Boom. She's on social media. So I vouch for her in being a role model or mentor and social media gives us that possibility. So please, make that effort, students. But Ashley, is there anything else you'd like to share as a resource or a guide or a contact?
Yeah, I think, I'm very accessible and I spend most of my time on Instagram. So that's the best place to find me on social media. And, sometimes I'm traveling, so I don't always answer messages right away, but I will always answer messages. So if anyone listening wants to send me a message, I'm here for them. I will provide support and maybe custom resources if they need it. If anyone listening thinks we'd love to bring Ashley to our school for an assembly, I would love that as well. I would say maybe start on Instagram. My website link is there, but you can also just look up ashleybendiksen.com. And then I think just as a really important resource is just to remind everybody listening that there are tons of anonymous, confidential, 24/7 hotlines, and some of them are even text lines. So if at any point you feel like you want some advice from, maybe somebody who's not in your space, in your life, just some really objective, kind of non-biased advice, there are people out there that can provide support at any moment, any day, any hour of the night. And sometimes it's just better to talk to someone, even if that's sending a text to a helpline worker versus dealing with stuff on your own. So there's always resources, no matter where you are, no matter what barriers you think exist for you, there's always some way you can talk to someone.
Very cool. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.